Hello and welcome to Reach for the Stars. In this presentation, I just want to show you or tell you what is astrology. So many people have questions and are just fascinated, but actually don't really know how it works, where it comes from, what it is. So I want to give you a short intro in what astrology actually is. So first, to my personality, I'm Rahel. I'm a kinesiology and hypnotherapist. I have my own practice and I do this now since 2018, full time. And before, I used to work for corporate companies and I did my apprenticeship and I just had a different path. And I was always super interested in the deeper meaning of the universe or where we're living and where we're coming from. So that is actually what I love about astrology. It is something that I used to read in the newspapers, and then on some days I was like, "Oh my God, how do they know this?" And on other days I was like, "Well, no, I don't think it's actually pretty accurate." But I was always fascinated about, people when they were astrologers or when I was in contact with people who were in astrology, they were able to tell me about my personality just like that. And I was like, how do they actually know? So I was always pretty fascinated, and that's what I loved about astrology and got to know even better when I started my own astrology course. And that was motivation enough of taking a reading, of having like these ideas of an astrologer telling me, hey, look, your elements or your drive or this is how you think is according to your personality. And I was just so fascinated that it was like, I want to study this stuff by myself. And I actually think it's map orientation by deciding where your journey goes. Maybe you don't have an idea of where it goes. And it's just a super cool tool to just know, where are the challenges? Why do I have to go through this? What am I made for on this planet? And how can I use my potential or maybe use my challenges as a potential and shape my own destiny? So that's why I am so into astrology. And I think it can help so many people on this planet through times where we just don't have answers or nobody can give us a forecast or maybe ahead of period of time. So today I want to talk about four topics. That is like, what is a horoscope, frequent asked questions, what are the planets, and we will go a little bit into the big three. It's like a horoscope, it's also called erratics, is like taking a picture to the universe. It's like looking up, taking a picture, and that's how a horoscope is going to be designed. And it's actually in multiple layers, which is we have the elements, which is we have earth, we have air, we have water, and we have fire. And those are already four different dynamics. And out of these dynamics, we have our zodiac signs, which are also into four elements and then divided by three. So we have like, if we would take air signs, we would have Libra, we would have Aquarius, and we would have Gemini. And all of the three have different modalities, which can be cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So the three signs are air signs, but they still are different, and that's why we get them into these modalities. Some are like more pushy, initiative, some are more like stabilizing, and some are more of having a diversity. And that's why it's the zodiac signs are so different. And then we have the planet area of how the planets were in that situation or in that time. Like if we would take a picture now, we would see, for example, that Uranus would be in Taurus, we would have Pluto transiting into Aquarius, and so on. So it's about taking a picture of the planets of how they were. And the aspects are more a complicated thing. So it's like the communication of the planets. It's like you having a conversation or how you get into dialogue or in a relationship with your neighbors. Like it can be that your neighbor across, you're like, I don't know about this. The one who lives like diagonal from you, you're like, oh, I'm fine with that one. When the neighbor next to you can be challenging sometimes. The other neighbor next to you can be a friend of yours. So it's about the dynamic of how your relationship is in your chart. So that's why we have the planets, we have the zodiac signs, we have the aspects, and then we have the 12 houses. And why we need the houses is, or how we can get more precise is, people ask me, why do you need exactly your place and time? It's because with place and time, the horoscope is exactly pretty accurate of what it was, how the picture looked like. Because of the time, you can say it looked like this and not like this. And so the time, your birth time, decides on what your houses are going to be, or how your houses are defined. And so every time we talk about our rising sign, that's like one of the things we know. It's like our star sign, like when, like in what month were you born, at which time. And so then you just know, okay, this is my star sign. I'm a Libra, or I'm a Taurus. For myself, I am a Sagittarius, which means that people are like, oh yeah, you were kind of born maybe in December, end of November. So that is my star sign. But then knowing of what time I was born and which day actually gives me the whole horoscope of what was my rising sign. So people are like, I'm rising this and that. So I'm a rising Gemini, which means I was born in the afternoon, late afternoon, actually at 17:19, so 5:19 p.m. And which means Gemini is my rising sign, which means my rising sign means the sun was the sunrise in Gemini. And that's why we talk about our rising signs. But there are other four gates in our life. So people just know their star sign and then their rising sign, like, oh, my ascendant is Gemini. And then we have these four gates of, I call it ACDC, ICMC, which means those are just the four gates of life that say a lot more about us, of like how we show ourselves, how we go into relationships, where we're coming from in our family, and where we need to go in a more career way. So those are the four gates of like me, myself, and I, and with others, where I come from, where I need to go. And so then when we talk about, the planets, it's about what is where. So it's like the planets show us what it is in our chart. It can be identity, it can be relationships, it's about how we deal with money, how we go on to things, how is our drive and thrive. And then also how are our emotions, and how is our communication. So that's what the planets are, of what is symbolizing in our, or which character is in our chart. And then the zodiac sign is kind of like, how is that person behaving? So it depends. I'm always like talking into, imagine having different Disney characters, of like, if we take Mulan, she's like a fighter, and the Mulan, as we know her, she's like a fiery fighter. But it can also be that she would be more like Pocahontas, or that she more be like Cinderella, or like Ariel. So they all have different modalities of how they do things. Like Mulan, she's just stop and go, like without thinking, she just goes. And then maybe Cinderella is more like, I need to think about it and then I go. So that's about how we do things, in which kind of dress are they. And the houses is like where it takes place. So people are maybe more like, I have my Mars, I have in my 10th house, 11th house. So I'm really good at doing stuff when it comes to business, or then with my friends, or organize things. Then I'm like, then I just have a power to just drive and do it the way I want to do it. So it's actually showing us how, or what is showing itself how and where. And with the aspects, it's about how do I get along with other things, or where are my challenges, and why do I maybe overthink things before doing it, or why am I suppressed with my feelings? So that is always a dialogue between two or even three or multiple planets. So if you don't know your chart yet, it's a pretty good idea to actually create your own chart on astro.com. There's also Astro Cafe, where they're already explaining to you what means what planet-wise. And the chart that I'm using here is AstroWorks. It costs, I think, $10, but I think it's worth it if you want to go deeper into astrology. If you're just being like, okay, I just want to, drizzle myself a little bit with knowledge without getting deeper into it, then don't buy it yet. But otherwise, astro.com is a great tool to just design your chart, to even read about it, to go deeper into place, maybe astrology, cartography, where you can look like where are my best options to travel, or in what kind of relationship do I need to be. They have tons of free stuff, so it's pretty amazing. And the frequent asked questions are kind of like, how old is astrology? So astrology has been around, I think, for 5,000 years. So it goes back to ancient times, and we still have our free will. Like, everybody's like, well, if this is all in the stars and written in the stars, do I have a free will? What can I do with it? So it's about how you live life, right? And if you compare Hitler's and Charlie Chaplin's astrology chart, then they actually look pretty much the same, but they lived it differently. So you actually do have a free will of what you want to do. And why astronomers don't believe in astrology is because I think the biggest illusion is that our solar system, we think that it's just sticking the way it is, but it's actually moving. So through the movement, the calculation is not the same anymore as 5,000 years ago. So I think now we have 13 zodiac signs, but even more star signs, or star pictures. So everything evolves with technology, and through that the universe is actually moving. And that's why astronomers and astrologers are not always on the same page. Astrology types, so we have Western, we have Vedic, Indian, Chinese, Mayan. All of them are kind of based on the 4 elements. I think that's kind of like the common thing, but then just everybody's using different tools. Like the Mayan, they have more like these symbolics, and then Chinese, they have more like, the rats and the dragons and all of that. And the Vedic is also different. They have a different housing system, and Western has the chart that I just showed you. And normally there are also different systems. So kind of like for the calculation of the houses. So the one that I use is Koch, and it's a pretty, accurate or pretty good interpretation system. And then I get asked a lot, what about C-sections? What about twins? What about being born abroad? So what about if I don't know my birth time? So I think with C-sections, yeah, you can plan birth, but sometimes not everything is plannable. So people or babies just get born whatever time they need to get born. Same with twins. Twins can have the identical chart, but as I said, you can have 2 charts the same, but can be totally different lift. And what about born abroad? It's always about where you were born. I think it's always good to have 2 charts of kind of like when you were born, adapt that place. If you moved and lived for a longer time of your life in another place, then you need another chart. And it's always good to combine the 2 if they're totally different. Newspaper horoscope, why it's not always true what's in the newspapers is because, yeah, it always has to do with your own chart. So the newspaper horoscope is called a mundane chart, which is the planets right now, of taking a picture right now and then interpreting this. And then some people are like, what is wrong with the stars? I feel like this and that. Do you feel the same? And they're like, no, I don't feel the same. But how come we're only 3 days apart born? And then it always has to do with your own chart of how it affects you, how it influences you. And that's why every chart is so unique and has a different interpretation or transits or effect on your own chart. But it's a good thing that we have newspaper horoscopes, because that's why people actually know about astrology and get into astrology. What about partnership? So I get that often, like, okay, so I'm a Leo. Do I fit to a Scorpio? And then I would say, well, this is a fire sign and a water sign. This can be harsh. This can be difficult. But in the end, there are no combinations, because it always depends on how this couple lives their relationship, and they're both their individual horoscopes. So nothing is, you can say there is no bad horoscope, but also not a good horoscope. It's just very neutral. And when it comes to relationship, it's always a question of how people really live their relationships. You can see dynamics of like, okay, maybe communication level can be maybe difficult on this and this, or maybe you have challenges with this and that, but also the potential of how you can understand each other better. So it's a cool thing of knowing what is your chart, how you're living your chart, what partner has a chart, and how you can live with the two of them in comparison. So we call this a synastry of like having the two horoscopes, of putting it into a mirror, of like putting it on them, and then you can see of how they actually fit together, or how they lay on each other. And there's also a combine horoscope, where you actually take the two and make another one, because that's what we know, right? So we know people who are the same star sign, but you have different energies with them. And that's why it's because everybody has different modalities, different elements, different calculation, different drives, different communication. And that's why it's so different to be with someone. For what can astrology be used for? Technically for everything, for your career, for your love life, for your personal growth, for what is going on in the moment, for predictions, maybe for what energy am I gonna have the next year, what will be maybe a challenge, kind of like to see what kind of dynamic am I going for? What am I living at the moment? Why don't I understand certain situations? Why am I feeling this and that way? So you can actually see what is affecting your identity, what is affecting your emotions, your relationships, your money, partnerships, and so on. Why does it need a human being for the interpretation? So it's super important, because as I said, we have these 4 gates. So we have, let's say, our ascendant, right? So I have a friend, she is a Libra, which should be like, super harmonious, pretty outgoing, kind of like looking for harmony, pretty outspoken, more or less. But she has Pluto on her ascendant, and Pluto is a planet of, I would say, death or transformation, or like not always like super secretive and mystical. And so she has that on her ascendant, on a Libra ascendant, which means Libra is like super, loving, caring, and like super open, harmonious. But then she has Pluto of having like not the dark side, but kind of like being like an introverted side on her actually more exterior side. So that's why there is a human being needed, because we can actually see, okay, this is what we need to see on this interpretation or the calculation. So we sometimes have to calculate or see on the birth chart on what kind of effect things can have. So everything that is like on a gate, on an ascendant, on a descendant, on immunocoeli, IC or MC. So you actually see, or sometimes there are 2 planets stuck together, and then some planets they're harmonious, and some planets they couldn't be more different. And that's why it's all about the question of how to interpret it, or have a chart in how a chart can be interpreted. And it's also pretty interesting of the astrological new year, 21st of March. So we start in astrology, our chart, our new year is the 21st of March. It starts with Aries, of getting into spring and everything. So for us, it's sometimes difficult to say, okay, 1st of January, we're like, well, New Year is on the 21st of March. So that's why it can be sometimes pretty confusing. But if it's about being spring, that's kind of like the astrological new year, and that's why everybody goes crazy in astrology when it comes to March. And we're now in the age of Aquarius. Everything is changing, everything is shifting. Before we were in the age of Pisces, where a lot of, religion and everything was like in a spiritual world. We needed leaders to actually tell us what we should think. And now age of Aquarius is like, I just want to be free. I want to do whatever I want. I want to be my own guru. So that's how times are shifting. If you want to get more into age of Aquarius, you should definitely go for a go and read yourself into that. The planets. I remember the sentence of learning what kind of planets we have, but through that we're looking from the earth, we're having like it's called a geo view. We actually are looking from a perspective from the earth. So we actually have different planets, or one planet more that is not a planet, which is the moon. So we are looking at the sun, we're looking at the moon, we're looking at Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And there are other planets that are actually not planets. They're actually more calculated points. That is Chiron, Lilith, and the north and south nodes. And they're kind of like divided in these 3 categories of personal planets. That's why, because it is the sun. So we have 365 days to go around the sun. And then Mercury has 88 days to go around the sun. Venus has a year, Mars has about 2 years, and that's why they're moving pretty fast around the sun. And when we look at Pluto, he is actually moving more than 250 years in one go around the sun. So that's why when people are born, like sometimes they have 10 years age gap, they would still have the same Pluto, because everything has been, like moving super slowly. But then, Mercury is already in sometimes a few days in a different sign. And that's why it's about looking at these personal planets that are closer to the sun, that gives us more an idea of personality. And Jupiter, Saturn, so everything that comes after Jupiter is like, we call it social planets or transpersonal planets, because they're slow moving, and more or less everybody who was kind of like born in the same generation, they have the same planets. But of course, it always depends on how these planets, we call it the personal planets, talk to the other planets, because that can be very different, even though you were born 3 days apart, or as I'm saying, not even on the same day, but morning or evening, or even sometimes minutes can be so important to actually choose your ascendant, rising sign, and so on. And that's why I'm saying it's like super complex. It's having like a Rubik's cube then that would shift like this and that, and then you would have to interpret this whole Rubik's cube of every individual. And as I said, use reasons to use astrology, personal growth. It can be a guiding light, freedom, and choice for your own lesson. It's like a different dimensional perspective, and then you can apply it to every part of your job of being like, why do I feel like this? How's my communication? Why do I have problems with my boss at the moment? How can I deal with weaknesses, challenges, but also potential, and understand my crisis, changing times, and give your life more meaning and depth. And as I said, we always talk about the big 3. What are the big 3? It's about your sun sign, your rising sign, and your moon sign. So your sun sign kind of like says, this is who I am, this is my identity, this is my conscious self, this is my creation. And even though I have my sun sign in Sagittarius, it then depends on where is the Sagittarius, or how do I identify as a Sagittarius. Your rising sign can be an ascendant. It's like the stage of how I show myself and how people actually see me in the first moment. Like, immediately when they see me, or this can also change, by the way. So it always depends on your progressions, on your solar sign, on your transits. So sometimes you have these, affecting times that can change, and sometimes you are not always the same as your rising sign. Sometimes you can be an introvert, or you can be an extrovert, and vice versa. So it always depends, but that's what kind of like you were born with, or how you show yourself. And that's how you appear to others, how you go into the world, how you see the world. And like, for example, my sun sign is in Sagittarius. So for me, it's like super important to be super bubbly and with others and fiery. And I have dynamics and adventures, love to travel. My rising sign is a Gemini. Everybody who meets me, I'm like super curious. I ask so many questions, but I can be like, I appear super bubbly. And my moon sign, which is my subconscious, my intuition, my feelings of what I need, I have that in Virgo, which is like super structured and organized, and an earth sign that wants to have facts and figures. So I have like 3 different elements in my big 3. And that's why it's so interesting, because sometimes you can appear super bubbly and super fresh, but on the other side, when they get to know you, you're like, oh, she actually wants facts and figures. She wasn't just being bubbly just like that. And that's why it's always pretty cool to know your big 3, if like everything is in the same sign, or in the same modality, or in the same zodiac, or in the same house, or in the same element. And that's how you get to know yourself better. So if you're interested, just look at the next video and you will learn about your big 3, of how you can check out your big 3, what you can do with that. And that's how we're going to proceed. And if you're interested to even know more about astrology, there are so many things, of books and podcasts and everything. I am a big fan of The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need, or also astrology in your daily life, or using the wisdom of the stars in your everyday life. That's a great thing. And then also podcasts from Jessica Laniado, Astrology for Real Relationships, or also she has a ghost of a podcast, I think, the Astrology podcast, the Astrology Hub podcast, Cosmos documentary on, I think it's Disney, is amazing to just see like, how do these planets move around us. And if you want to use apps, AstroWorks, The Pattern, Moonly, Nebula, Moon Calendar, CoStar, Skyview is actually amazing, because you can just take your phone and see where the stars are aligned and how the star pictures are showing themselves. So I hope you have had fun, and I can't wait to see you in the next video of showing how your big 3 are actually in your chart.